So welcome everyone to our next episode of exploring the elements and interconnectedness of our local food system. And myself and Jerry Hush are hosting today. So please feel free if you have any questions, put them in the chat, concerns, technical difficulties, whatnot, let us know. As you know, our webinar series objectives are really to help us better understand our local food system, kind of the characteristics, what are some of the disruptions and opportunities that we've experienced, and what we might need to do to strengthen our local food system. And mostly, you know, how you might become involved and more informed about our local food system. So welcome. This is the map we've been using to kind of really show the complexity of our food system. And today we are going to be kind of focusing on the poultry industry. And we have Georgie here, who's going to help us understand the ins and outs and how it's interconnected to all of these other system pieces. And I would be remiss, right, if I didn't thank our sponsors from the Delaware Department of Ag to the Maryland Department of Ag to our University of Delaware Sea Grant to our cooperative extension system, and certainly some of our community partners as well. So thank you to all of them for their support and guidance. So today, I'm so excited. What's in your basket? Chicken or eggs? Exploring poultry and egg production within our Delaware and Maryland food system. And today we have Georgie Cartanza. She is with the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension, and she is our poultry extension agent. And she works a lot with poultry farmers and what are called integrators. We're going to learn more about that. And the public, building awareness and understanding best practices and that farmers can be using to grow their animals, their birds, and the impact that the industry has on our community. And she does that really grounded in research and outreach and her expertise. She has 27 years in the poultry industry. And she's worked with 2 large integrators on Delmarva and has been a poultry farmer for the last 16 years and has been an organic poultry farmer for the last 7 years. She is inspired by the challenges we face and public perception. And so Georgie really works to bridge the gap between perception and reality when it comes to growing poultry, both for meat and for eggs. And she has won several awards for environmental stewardship from the Conservation District and the Governor's Conservation Award. And in 2017, Georgie was chosen as the first Nuffield International Farming Scholar from the United States. Georgie has a degree in general agriculture from Delaware State University. And with that, I am going to stop sharing and allow Georgie to start her presentation. Thanks, Georgie.
Thank you, Maria, and thanks for the opportunity to share about the poultry industry. It's certainly something that's near and dear to my heart and something I worked in and around for a number of years. And I did not grow up on a farm, but I went to college and was really inspired to want to do something to help farmers, and the poultry industry was the biggest thing here on Delmarva. And so that's how I really got involved in the poultry industry. A company came and did on-campus interviews, and that's how my career started in poultry. So again, Alex, I really appreciate the opportunity. And my goal today is really to kind of hopefully, build an understanding how the poultry industry works on Delmarva, but really works this way really across the U.S. Hopefully dispel some myths and misconceptions that people may have about how we grow chickens, what we do, why we do it, and then kind of finish up with some challenges and trends that we're seeing, and then the opportunity to ask some questions. So I do work in a poultry extension, and what that means is that, I do a lot of outreach with poultry growers, trying to help them be better neighbors, be better environmental stewards, help them do better in terms of taking care of the birds, animal welfare, and just anything really associated, if they're performing or struggling to perform well with their chickens, I try to offer guidance and suggestions as to, help them be more competitive. And as Maria mentioned, I'm also a poultry farmer. Oh, and let me just mention real quick. So most of what you see in this slide here is some of the outreach I really do with kids, and I really enjoy that part of it. But we do things with STEM in schools with science, technology, engineering, and math. Last year in January, I did a whole series about Follow the Flock, and the kids got to see from beginning to end chickens coming to the farm. And then each week we would check in, and I would Zoom with them, and I would say, this is how much the chickens have grown. And I would tell them some facts about the chickens and what we're doing. And they could actually see the chickens present inside the house. They could see the conditions. And that went over really well. And so if you have any interest in looking at any of that, if you look me up on Facebook, those videos are public and you should be able to see them. You may see some funny videos as well. So hopefully you'll still, trust what I'm telling you today, even after you see those funny videos, because I'm a little bit ornery at times. So, and again, like I say, I'm a poultry grower. And so here's just a picture of my farm from above. And one is before I actually put in a vegetative buffer. The other one is after, as I did make the transition to organic. There's some changes that were made to the farm, but just kind of gives you a little just picture. Like I say, I've been a chicken farmer for 16 years and have quite a bit of experience. So let's get into the kind of nuts and bolts of things. So there are different types of poultry production, and that's something that a lot of folks sometimes don't realize. But we do have different scales of production as well. So we have small flocks and backyard flocks, and those are people who maybe do it as a hobby. Some people do it as a business. They may be doing it for egg and meat production. Typically, those are going to be sold a little bit more locally. And there can be a range of types of production. They can be conventional, it can be organic, free range. The size of birds they're growing can vary. The type of birds can vary greatly. And then we have our more large flocks, and we do have some commercial layers here. We don't have a lot of them in our area, but we do have some, and they tend to be, if you're in Delaware, kind of more north, Newcastle County. If you go into Maryland, it's going to be more across the border on the north end of Maryland, but still on the Eastern Shore. And, but there are some others located in Maryland as well. They could be, like, say, you could have commercial layers. We have a lot of broilers, and a lot of our talk today will focus on broilers because that's predominantly what we do grow here in this Delaware, Maryland region, and especially on the Delmarva Peninsula. Those birds are distributed locally, nationally, and internationally. And we do grow a lot of conventional. The majority of what we grow is conventional, although we do grow organic chickens here as well. And we actually grow more organic chickens in Delaware and Maryland, and they're processed in Milford, Delaware, than any other place in the US. I find that to be kind of interesting because we're rather small. And so some of those birds have outdoor access. There are chickens that are grown antibiotic free, no antibiotics ever. So again, there's a variety of ways that chickens are grown. And then I mentioned here too about Cornish, broilers, and roasters. And so this is actually, these may all be the same breed of chicken. It's just the length of time that those chickens are grown. So if you're looking for a Cornish hen, that's going to be a bird, typically going to be a female chicken that's going to be grown to about 4 weeks of age. And you may say, well, why 4 weeks? Or not necessarily 4 weeks, but why females? And female because they're more consistent in their growth and more predictable versus the male. And so that's the reason why Cornish hens would be like that. And then broilers could be a male-female mix. We call those straight run, or they could be a gender identified bird that may be all females or all males, just depending on what the goal is of growing those chickens. And so those birds could be anywhere from 5 weeks of age to maybe 7 to 8 weeks of age. And what really drives that is the consumer. So if Chick-fil-A calls up and says, hey, we want 3-ounce breasts, we are going to have to grow the chicken to try to get the breast to be 3 ounces. When you go to a Sam's Club and you say, oh my gosh, I see the breasts and they're like this, they look huge. That the reason why that breast is as big as it is because that's probably from an 8 or 9 week old bird. It could have been a male, it could have been a female, but probably more likely to have maybe been a male. So that really is the difference. They're actually all the same breed of chicken. It's really just the length of time they're grown. And again, that's all very much driven by what the consumer wants. And so when you think about layers versus broilers, this picture here really kind of shows the difference. And there's really a difference in the conformation of those birds and the breeds of birds that those are. So if you look on the right-hand side, and I'm going to see if I can get the pointer to come up, or maybe I better not mess with anything, but well, let me see if I can grab it. So on the right-hand side here, we do have the layer bird, right? And so the layer bird, I hope you can see it, is a little skinnier, a little thinner, and maybe may end up being a little bit taller in terms of their size. And you have to think about this bird's primary function is to lay eggs. So the nutrition that this bird eats is not about making body mass or body weight. It's really about creating eggs. And then if you look at the other side at this broiler bird, you see they tend to be a little fuller or bigger in their conformation and will probably be a little shorter and stockier. And again, that's because this bird, the goal of this bird and this breed is to be high meat yielding and produce a lot of body mass for consumption of meat. And so that's a big difference that you'll see between these two types of birds in the house. Now, a chicken does come from an egg, right? So there has to be some broiler chickens that do lay eggs to become the broiler chickens that we eat. And so I'm going to explain a little bit about that pipeline depending on the different chickens that we're looking at. And the color of the chickens, a lot of times your laying hens will be white leghorns. So this was just a picture to kind of share that I found that had everything I was looking for. So when we look at the egg laying side of things, the process, I always think of egg or chicken production really is kind of a pipeline. And so if we were to look at this here as the pipeline of these chickens, how they get to where they're laying eggs for us to consume, you start with a breeder, primary breeders, and basically this is the grandparents of the chickens that will eventually eat, or of the egg laying chickens that will lay eggs. And so, but this here is where we have the desirable characteristics. So this might be, hey, maybe this is where we find that chicken has a tendency to be a double yolker when she lays eggs, or they're just a quality, maybe they're more heat tolerant or whatever that may be. But it takes about 21 weeks for a chicken to become sexually mature. And so, and as these chickens are raised, they're on a pullet farm until they get to the point where they can go to a breeder farm. And at this point on the breeder farm is where the chickens will be allowed to mate and be able to have eggs that will be incubated for 3 weeks, that will then become the chickens that will lay the eggs that will go to a hen house for us to be able to eat those eggs. And this is quite similar, even in meat production, is that you have pedigree stock that goes to great grandparents, to grandparents, then to the parent stock that actually is what we're consuming. And so that's kind of the lifeline and the process of getting to the point where we have these egg layers. So a chicken is going to lay one egg about every 25 hours. So if you have a farm that has 1 million chickens on it, you're probably going to get about 1 million eggs a day. And so then those eggs are collected depending on what type of production it is. If it's in a large scale, a lot of egg farms have capacities of 1 million birds in one location. Out in the Midwest, it's not unusual to find farms that have 4 million egg laying chickens in one location. And so those eggs are collected. They may come through a belt. They could be hand collected by people. They're then graded and then distributed across the country to, the consumers and the buyers who want to purchase that product. But just to kind of give you an idea, the value of that in Delaware is about $17 million in terms of egg production. And in Maryland, it's almost about $37 million. So it's significant, but is not that significant when compared to broiler production, but still an important part of our economy. So this here is kind of showing you the broiler, how that lifeline kind of goes. And so again, you've got this pedigree grandparent stock, you got your breeder chicks, they go to a breeder farm. Now, most of the breeder farms that feed into Delaware and Maryland and Virginia, they're not located here. They're actually in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia and down in North Carolina. And so they don't have those birds here because we do have a higher concentration of broiler birds. And those birds are going to live, up to probably like 70 weeks of age. And so we want to put them in a location where there's not as high a concentration of poultry as what we have here on Delmarva. And so those breeder farms will lay those eggs. Those eggs will be shipped up here on tractor trailers to hatcheries. And those birds will be hatched here on Delmarva and then delivered to a broiler house. So those broiler chickens will then go in a broiler house. And that's what I would have on my farm. And they are grown out again to anywhere 5 to 8 weeks. It just depends on what the consumer wants and what you're contracted to do. So, so once that's ready to be marketed, they go to the processing plant, and that can go to the food service industry for the processing, to the grocery store, or even potentially to export. And we actually export chicken to over 180 countries from Delmarva. But if you look here, Delaware produces about $940 million worth of fresh poultry of poultry products to be sold. And that should right here in this graph, this is what all the agricultural commodities for Delaware represent. And so 81% of that is represented by the broilers. If you also look here at the corn and soybeans, a majority of the corn and soybeans that are grown here actually go to feed these broilers, which I'll talk a little bit more later, but you can see what a big slice of the pie and how important the broiler production is to the Delaware economy. If you look at Maryland, it's almost $900 million worth of value to agriculture in Maryland, and that's about 47% of their total. And then you can see, about 30% of that value is in corn and soybean production. So critical to the economy when you look at agriculture, what does this broiler production mean to us here? And then you might say to yourself, well, gosh, most of this broiler production, it happens like from, if I were to kind of draw a circle here, the majority of it occurs right in this area on the Delmarva Peninsula. And you can say, okay, well, gosh, we're surrounded by a lot of water here. Well, why would this thrive here? Well, if you're selling a fresh product, 1/3 of the nation's population lives within 8 hours of Delmarva. And so, and you've got the infrastructure from a transportation standpoint to get this product to Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, Norfolk, and up and down the East Coast. And so that's why the poultry industry has been a good fit for this area and why it's here. It was also birthed here kind of by mistake in Ocean View, Delaware, when Cecil Steele received 500 chickens rather than her order of 50 chickens. And so that kind of birthed she had intended for those birds to be layers, but having so many, she didn't have room for that. So she actually ended up selling them as broiler meat and made more money. And that was kind of how this industry was birthed here. But we do grow about 6.7% of US poultry right here in this small area of the US. And so, so we want to talk a little bit about vertical integration. So most of our broiler industry is vertically integrated. And so what that means is that, you have a integrator that pretty much controls all aspects of production. So from the breeders that are going to lay the eggs that will be brought here and put in a hatchery to they bring them to the broiler houses. As the person growing the chickens, the poultry company is going to provide, or that integrator is going to provide the chicks, the feed. They're going to supply someone to hopefully guide you through the process. They're going to provide the fuel, the litter, the pine shavings, the bedding material. So they're going to provide with all those pieces. They're going to take care of marketing that product, processing the product, and getting it shipped out. And so for the grower, their responsibilities really are about the animal husbandry and taking care of those chickens while they're present in the house. And so I'm going to go into talk a little bit about this once it goes to processing and how all this works in the distribution chain. But one thing we are very fortunate here on Delmarva, and somebody may say we're fortunate and some may say we're not, but from a grower perspective, we have 5 different companies, integrators that you can grow for here. And if you look at the numbers next to those names, that's just how they rank in the US as far as the amount of total pounds produced in the US. And so from a grower perspective, to have the choice that, hey, maybe if I don't want to grow from one company, maybe I'll have the option to grow for another. It allows for that. And so that's what's good about it. There are some locations in the country, if you build a poultry house, you may have one integrator to grow with, or maybe two. And if you fall out of favor, or if you don't do what you're supposed to, you may not have the option to go to another integrator. So that's how we're fortunate in that. So we do have Amick, Tyson, Allen Harim, Purdue, Manure, and then Coleman is the organic part of Purdue. So, so this is a picture of a modern poultry house. If you live on Delmarva, I imagine you probably have seen one of these or driven by it. And some people will say that that's a factory farm, or they may believe it to be corporate owned. But these are actually, most of them are family owned and operated. I know my farm, I have one person helps me out on the farm. They are owned by the farmer. They are not owned by the company. And you may see that sign at the end of the lane, and it does have the logo, but you'll see a name there, and that is the farm name that the grower has chosen for it to be. And they are the one that's responsible for taking care of those chickens day in, day out on that farm. And so a lot of people also say, well, that's a factory farm. And one lady said that to me one time, and I said to her, I said, why do you think this is a factory farm? And she says, well, look at all those fans. Look at all the equipment that's there. And so one of the things I want to point out is that all the equipment that is in this house is really about creating an environment for this chicken to thrive and to minimize stress as much as possible. So when you go by and you see all these fans, if you were to go back, 25 years ago, before they invented this is called what's called tunnel ventilation, we can actually create a wind tunnel effect in this house, that we can pull the air through this house and make it feel much cooler to these birds than what they would feel if we were back 25 years ago and we would opened up. These houses used to have curtains on the side. We would open up the curtains, and if it was 95 degrees outside, it was going to be 95 degrees inside. And that was stressful to a market age bird. So in today's world, we can actually make it feel like it's about 68 degrees in that chicken house with this wind tunnel effect. And with evaporative cooling, we can make these birds feel more comfortable. So I hope you'll maybe see, that perception of factory farming isn't necessarily the case if that's the way you're looking at the way the house is equipped. You also see that farms may have multiple houses, right? And so there might be 4 houses, 6 houses. Well, a lot of farmers have adopted technology that allows an individual to take care of a lot more capacity, a lot more housing, a lot more birds than what they could 25 years ago. When I first started in this business, they used to say 4 houses that were 80,000 capacity in terms of birds would have been a full-time job. Today, one individual can take care of 2 to probably about 2.5 times that much and still do a quality job because of adopting that technology. But technology does come at a cost. And so, so houses getting bigger has helped lessen that cost per square foot so that it can still be economical to be a poultry farmer and still be profitable. So hopefully that touches on that a little bit. There's a lot that goes into it, but something just to understand. And so just to kind of give you an idea of scale, I'm not going to read you all these things, but the average, a lot of chicken houses today are about 600 feet long. So that's 2 football fields end to end. And so this is actually a picture of my farm. I have 4 houses. I can grow about 148,000 chickens each flock. I grow them to 7 weeks of age. They're going to weigh about 6.5 pounds. I grow about 5.5 flocks a year. And the average American does eat about 108 pounds of chicken per person that they consume chicken. And so what does that mean? So I could feed 46,000 Americans all the chicken they need for a year. But I actually like to think of it more like this. If you were to buy a rotisserie chicken from a Sam's Club or a Walmart, I could feed 780,000 families a rotisserie chicken for a night, for one night's dinner. And so that's pretty amazing. But it also speaks to the efficiency of the process of how we can grow these chickens. And I'm going to try to explain, how do we get there and how can we accomplish that? And again, when you think about, you can see here in this picture, there's a whole bunch of fans there. And again, that allows us to create an environment that's more comfortable as these birds get bigger, and especially when we get into warm and extremely hot weather. So when I think about, the impact on the environment, right? Much of what happens within the poultry industry is recycled. Everything really gets used. And so if we start here at this circle, our farmers, our local farmers actually get a premium for their crops, for their corn and soybeans and wheat, because of their close proximity to the end user. And the end user is these chickens, right? So this corn and soybeans goes to be used to make feed. The chickens consume the feed, right? And always when I'm talking to the kids at schools, I say, hey, if something goes in, something's got to come out. And they're always pretty excited to say, oh, it's poop. But when any time an animal does that, we actually call it manure. And then that manure is utilized as fertilizer for these corn, soybeans and wheat. And a lot of our fertilizers are byproducts of fossil fuel production, or processing. And so when we can use poultry manure that actually also has pine shavings mixed in with it, because that's the bedding material, it does add back more organic material to the soil that is utilized by these crops. So it is a full cycle as far as how that is utilized and goes through that process. If you were to compare the chickens we grow today versus what we did in 1965, we've actually decreased our environmental footprint by 50%. And so, and this kind of just tells you here on the left-hand side of the screen, some of the statistics, but we are using 75% fewer resources than we once did, less farmland, 58% less water. We're using less fossil fuels. For any chicken farmer, most of their biggest expense on their farm is their mortgage payment to pay for the poultry houses and potentially the land. But their second most expensive expense is their electric bill. And so farmers are always looking for technologies that help make their energy use less and help them be more efficient. But there are a number of farms here, especially in Delaware and Maryland, that have adopted solar renewable energy to try to help lessen their impact, but also help with that cost of electric. And we've also had a reduction in greenhouse gases by 36%. Now, the poultry manure that's not necessarily used for the crops is actually utilized. Some of it is transported and used in the mushroom industry in Pennsylvania. So some of that, not all of that manure stays here. It is used for other uses, and there is the exploration of being able to use it for energy use, but that's still in the works. So that's, if you look at the on-farm process, this would be a good snapshot of on-farm impact. When you go to the processing plant, the birds come to the processing plant, the birds are processed, they go to whole birds parts further processed. And then you have, byproducts that also come out of this process. So you've got all the blood, you've got the bone, you've got the feathers. And so here pictured are just some of the, those go to rendering. And so they're dehydrated. And so you end up with blood meal, bone meal, and feather meal. And so this is very high in protein and can be utilized for other animal food protein sources, to be utilized by, a lot of it may go to the fish industry, to be used as protein in food for other feedstock. And then, and I just wanted to share this, is that if you were to go back 10, 15 years ago, these are chicken feet, right? And we call these chicken paws. And this would have been something that would have been thrown away years ago. It would have went to rendering and would have been ground down and not, sold as anything as far as a chicken paw. Today, this is actually the most profitable part of a chicken for the integrator. A lot of people might assume it's boneless chicken, boneless, skinless chicken breast, but that's actually not the case. It's actually the paws. And the paws are also the number one way that we judge animal welfare in the poultry house. And what are the conditions like? Because if this paw was ulcerated, meaning that it would have a burn, that would indicate that the conditions that chicken was raised in maybe were not as good as they should have been, and those paws would be downgraded. So so that's one of the things that we look for, is in terms of, is the right environment being created in that poultry house to minimize stress on that bird, and so that he can thrive and have the best life while he is there. And so I like to share that because a lot of people are not aware of that. Now, another thing is that, the environment is very important to farmers in general, but also to poultry farmers as well. And I just wanted to share a few things that have been done and adopted really probably over the past 20 to 30 years to help lessen the impact poultry farmers in particular have on the environment. So this right here is what we call a heavy use pad. And right here at the end of this chicken house, when the birds are caught, a lot of people, you see the chickens going, they're caught and they're put in cages, and then they're put on trucks to be transported to the processing plant. Meat chickens are not grown in cages. And so anybody that, like thinks that they see one of those trucks going down the road and they think that they're not grown in those cages, that's solely for transport. When they're in the house, these chicken houses, mine in particular, are 39,000 square feet. Those chickens can go anywhere they want to, anytime in that chicken house. They have access to feed and water anytime they want it. So that is a myth that some people believe, but meat chickens are not grown in cages. Oftentimes laying chickens are grown in cages. It actually is less stressful for them in terms of cannibalism and in terms of helping with their egg laying. When you put layer birds in a environment where they don't have cages, your egg production will not be as good. So, if you're choosing, I want cage-free chickens, cage-free eggs, then certainly that you have that option to do that. But, make sure that if that's what you value, that it really is doing what you want it to do. So I got a little off track there, but so these heavy use pads, when they go in to catch these chickens, the forklift will go in and out. And if there was no concrete pad here, you would have litter that would come in and out of the house. And then you had the potential for that to infiltrate into the groundwater. So this has made it much easier to clean that material up, move it back into the house, or to move it over to this building right here. And this is called a manure storage building. It also has another heavy use concrete pad. So as we move this product from here over to here, we can store it and keep it under cover so it is kept out of the elements until it is able to be spread on a field, and at which time it would be used as fertilizer, and it would be applied at a time when it would be useful to the crop. So less of the nutrients would be wasted. And so that's the reason for these. If you ever ride by a farm and you see this is called a manure storage building, and its purpose is to store manure in. If you see this little lean-to off to the side here, each day you are going to have a little bit of mortality that may occur on a farm. And we do compost that mortality in these channel composters. And then that is also utilized as fertilizer on crops. And here I just wanted to show where many farms are adopting vegetative buffers. And so these are 2 rows of trees. They're actually they're probably twice this tall now. But these act as a windbreak, so that helps with energy cost. They help capture any dust and particulates that may be coming out of the fans. They do make the farm more aesthetically pleasing to your neighbors. And so many farmers have adopted the vegetative buffers. They're also doing pollinator plots to help give habitat to pollinators, and are adopting warm season grasses that they're also planting in closer proximity to the poultry house, because they also act as a means of capturing dust and particulates as they exit the house. So we touched on the environment. I wanted to kind of mention, now these numbers are for Delmarva, and this is for the Delmarva Peninsula. I didn't separate out Virginia. I know this is kind of geared more towards Maryland and Delaware, but Maryland, Delaware is definitely a bigger portion of these numbers. And so what's the economic impact? And so there was about 4.2 billion birds that were sold. 567 million chickens were raised here on Delmarva. To feed these chickens, it's about $1.3 billion. And so again, that benefits local farmers. There's about 1,300 poultry growers that grow these chickens here. And there's about almost 18,000 jobs that the poultry industry creates here on Delmarva. And so that's important, right? All those pieces are important, but the piece sometimes that, especially when somebody say, well, I don't like the way the chickens smell, or, I don't like to see the chickens going down the road in those trucks. It's a critically important industry to our community in terms of creating jobs. So for every one job that somebody actually works in the industry, it's creating 7 jobs in the community. And that's doctors and lawyers and accountants. It's a person working at Wawa. It's the person working in Walmart. So, and we're all connected. And, it's important that we understand, how the pieces fit together, because, the poultry industry doesn't exist without the growers. It doesn't exist without the processing plant and the integrator. It doesn't work. It doesn't fit, it doesn't function if we don't have farmers growing corn and soybeans. So it's all connected. And then, and how we all branch out into the community. And so I think it's important, and when we talk about some of the myths and misconceptions, is, how did we get here in terms of, the size of these chickens, right? And I totally understand why the consumer might think, oh my gosh, if I look at this picture, right, and I look at this chicken here, this is a chicken from 1957, right? And this is an 8-week-old chicken. And I look at the chicken here today, I think, oh my gosh, you must be doing something to that chicken to get from here to here. Well, if you don't learn anything from me today at all, the one thing I want to assure you of, any commercially grown chicken is not given any hormones or any steroids. And the way we got from here to here, number one, is in genetics. And so over time, we selected for chickens that were fast growing, high meat yielding, good livability, good feed conversion. All those pieces were selected over time. And the reason why chickens have evolved like this versus, say, a beef cow, a chicken will become sexually mature within about 21 weeks of age. They will start to lay eggs. It takes a beef cow 2 years to become sexually mature for them to be able to have, a baby. It takes 21 days of incubation. Once that egg is fertilized, if it's incubated at the right temperature, you're going to have the next generation of chickens in 21 days. It takes 10 months of gestation to get a cow. So this is why you've seen the poultry evolve the way they have. And it's all about genetics. The chickens still do things all natural. Again, you might have a boy chicken. He's got nice legs. Girl chicken, she might have, like I say, a great feed conversion. You let those two get together, the next generation of chickens hopefully will now have those nice legs and that little bit better feed conversion. And it's really that's how things have evolved. And really prior to 1945, well, really prior to World War II, chicken was really a delicacy. Well, I wouldn't call it a delicacy, but it wasn't something, you had it for special occasions, right? And when you had that chicken was probably spent fowl. It was an egg-laying chicken that was the skinny chicken, didn't have a lot of meat on it. And probably when you ate it, the meat was kind of tough. And if you've ever eaten any condensed chicken noodle soup, if you ever have noticed how little the pieces of chicken are, well, they're that little because they're that tough, right? And you can think, oh, I'm chewing on this little piece of chicken for a really long time. And it's probably because it comes from spent fowl and from an egg-laying chicken. And so today, like I say, if you go back, to 1957, it would take 8 weeks to get a 2-pound chicken. If you go to 1978, it took 8 weeks to get a 4-pound chicken. And today we can grow in 8 weeks, probably an 8 to 9 pound chicken. And again, it's all about genetics. The other thing is there's been tremendous improvements in nutrition, and these chickens are going to get about 4 different feed types throughout their life that really gives them what they need for when they're a chick, from when they're 3 weeks old, when they're 5 weeks old, and when they're 7 weeks old. That nutrition is going to be the fat, the protein, the carbohydrate that those birds need to help optimize their growth. And we've had tremendous improvements in housing over the past 30 years. We've had tunnel ventilation, we've got environmental controllers. We've gone from trough drinkers to nipple drinkers. There's all these things that we've been able to do that create a more consistent environment for that bird that helps them grow and optimize the food intake that they have and their growth. And one other thing I didn't mention that I don't have here on the slide is that at one point in time, if you go back and watch some of the movies, Your Chicken Goes to War, or there was another thing, there's another movie called The Chicken of Tomorrow, right? And it really talks about this genetic breeding, but it also talks about how the role of antibiotics played in the growth of chickens. And one thing I want to mention here is that over the past 5 to 7 years, the amount of antibiotics used in chickens has been dramatically reduced. And you'll see when you go to the grocery store, you'll see labeling on packages that say no antibiotics, right? So any chicken that is processed doesn't have antibiotics in it, that's commercially processed. There's withdrawal periods if they were given antibiotics. But the majority of your chickens today are actually grown with no antibiotics ever. And so if you, I've got some websites listed at the end of my presentation that actually will, if you go and you look, there's actually has a description of what do all these different labels mean, because there's a lot of confusion associated with some of these labels. But there are no antibiotics in your chicken when it goes to processing. They actually check for that to make sure that there's no antibiotics present. And the chickens have a very reduced to no antibiotics ever at this point that they're given. So I just want to make sure you're clear that we're clear on that. So if you go to the grocery store and you have 2 packages of chicken side by side, one package says no hormones, no steroids, and the other one sitting next to it doesn't say that. Neither one of them have any hormones or steroids being given to those chickens. So just so you know that. So one of the things I want to mention, and this kind of goes back a little bit to the environmental impact, is, and also as a consumer, you know, you think about chicken tends to be cheaper than beef or pork. And the primary reason for that is really in their feed conversion. And what feed conversion means is that how much food does it take? Well, how many pounds of food does it take to get 1 pound of meat? Okay. And so the only other animal more efficient at taking feed and turning it into body weight is a fish compared to a chicken. So a fish takes about 1 pound of feed to get 1 pound of meat. A chicken, it takes about 1.7 pounds of feed to get 1 pound of meat. And a hog, it's about 3 pounds. And for a cow, it's about 6.8 pounds, right? And so 80% of the cost of growing a chick or any animal tends to be in the feed. So if you say, gosh, why aren't we eating steak every night? It's probably because it costs a lot more money to be able to feed that animal to be able to bring it to market. Also, probably the length of time it takes to get another generation of those animals. But this is the big reason why chicken costs less than other types of proteins, is because of that feed conversion ratio. It's also, remember, one of their goals when we started doing, trying to, get these chickens and change over time through genetics, is that was one of the qualities, the traits we looked for, was a chicken that could convert feed really efficiently. And so this was one of the goals. So when you think about environmental impact, right? When I think about the carbon footprint of chicken, this is a piece of that puzzle, right? Is, that if you got less feed going into this animal, then your carbon footprint is going to be a lot less. And you can kind of see how that compares with others if that's important to you. So I'm going to speed up just a little bit in terms of, because I want to get to some of the challenge and trends impacting egg, meat production, and availability. And so the 4 I'm going to focus on is COVID-19 and then avian influenza. And we have some of these other pressures that are happening, but these 2 are you're going to probably see what we've experienced recently and what we may see as time goes on. So when you look at the supply chain, right, you've got your protein, you've got your different animals that, if they're being grown, they have to go to some type of processing to be able to become something that we can eat. And oftentimes in these processing, depending on what scale of processing it is, you have people who are in close quarters to one another. And so COVID challenged us in the sense that, in our processing plants, it became more difficult to get animals processed because, we had to figure out, okay, how close can people be to one another? What interventions can be done to protect the employees? What needs to happen to make this, help facilitate this and make this work? And so there were some real challenges in terms of that. And then there was, then there were some employees that also did get sick during that period of time. So that also kind of caused this kind of bottleneck at the processing aspect of in animal protein production. And so what happened was we had this challenge of, okay, how is the meat getting to the end line? And so I'm going to switch to this slide because it really kind of, I think, maybe helps understand the chicken pipeline, right? So we've talked about the chicken pipeline is like, you've got these breeders that are laying eggs that now become the chickens that are going to lay the eggs to become the chickens we eat. And so, it's like a big ship that's really planned well over a year in advance, right? And it's kind of got a little rudder on this ship, and it takes a while to turn the ship. So March of 2020, bam, all of a sudden, restaurants are no longer taking chicken, schools close, and that creates a real challenge because 50% of the chicken that's grown goes to food service, like say retail or to restaurants, to schools, and 50% of it goes to grocery stores. Well, the way chicken is packaged for a grocery store is in 1, 2, 3 pound packages. When it's packaged for food service, it's in 50-pound packages. So the challenge is that most grocery stores aren't prepared or ready to get 50-pound packages, and most consumers are not in a position to buy 50-pound packages of chicken. So this created a real kind of quagmire of being able to facilitate getting that poultry to, to the people that needed it. And for any of you who live on the Eastern Shore, and I know they even did some truck sales off of the shore. This was one of the reasons why they did that, is that people were given the opportunity to buy chicken, in 40-pound boxes off the back of trucks locally. And like I say, I'm pretty sure they did some around Baltimore and Washington to be able to try to facilitate getting that chicken out there, because there was chicken that it got processed, and because it had no home, it went to the landfill, or it went to rendering. There were some chickens that they weren't able to even get processed, that were not able to make it to market. So so you have that dynamic going on in that situation. It affected the chicken growers, because you didn't know if you were going to have to keep your chickens 2 weeks longer, 3 weeks longer, and the chickens are continuing to grow, and you're trying to what are we going to do here? It changes the length of time between flocks for growers. So, so it was quite a challenging time. But that's how COVID affected, the chicken pipeline. And then also what happened during that period of time is that there was this huge explosion of interest in backyard and growing your own chickens, right? During COVID, they're like, oh, I'm going to grow my own chickens. If I can't get chicken at the grocery store, if I can't get eggs, well, I can grow my own chicken and eggs. And this little graphic just kind of shows from February 15th to May 15th of 2020, just how many more searches were made for, baby chicks, a chicken feed, and so on. And you can see that dramatic increase over that period of time. In Delaware, there's about 1,000 registered small flock owners. In Maryland, there's about 4,000 registered small flock owners. And there's probably about that many more that are not registered. We do encourage people to register. And it's really because, if we have an educational program, we want to make you aware of it. If there's a disease outbreak, we want to be able to make you aware of it. So those are the reasons why we want people to register their flocks. If you are somebody who is looking for a small flock producer or a processor of eggs and meat products, poultry meat, or even in other types of meat, I would encourage you to contact your departments of agriculture for Maryland or Delaware or your respective state, because they can probably connect you with those smaller scale producers to be able to provide you that information. And that's a piece of the puzzle, maybe with food security, but those smaller processors can't take on, the larger scale, what big scale processors do. There's just not enough of them, and they're not equipped to do that. And so just a little sideline is that, when with this increased interest in poultry production came an increase in salmonella outbreaks and so I saw a presentation from CDC that showed this. And I mentioned this because this correlates just about that time where everything shut down. So people start cooking their own poultry at the same time. And you have people who are now handling live poultry. And it's really important that you follow safety guidelines, wash your hands, you don't handle poultry and then put your hands, your fingers in your mouth, your nose, your ears, or anywhere else. It's really important that you follow good safety practices with that. So the second, the other pieces, and I know I'm running out of time here, is that is one of the things that's currently going on is avian influenza. And this just kind of shows all the flyways around the world where birds are going to go up to the Arctic circle, and they kind of commingle and hang out there. And then they come back down their migratory paths. And that creates a little bit of a problem, especially right now. Now, back in last fall in Europe, they were experiencing outbreaks of H5N1 avian influenza. And so, and we were concerned that there could be the potential for that here. And we are now experiencing that here in the United States. And so this just kind of shows these other flyways, how they work. We've got our Atlantic flyway, you've got your Mississippi flyway, your Central flyway, and your Pacific flyway here. And just again, how these birds kind of move and move around. And so this picture here actually shows right now all the cases. Now, some of these birds are no longer, many of these birds are no longer, but this is an ongoing tally of the 2021-2022 outbreak of H5N1 avian influenza in the US. The green ones are, some of them are wild birds. The red ones tend to be commercial flocks. Some of the others are backyard flocks. And I'm just going to hone in now on Delmarva. And so if you want to see this map live, you can actually click on these little circles. If you go to this, you put this into your search bar, and you can click on and you can see what kind of birds it was, how many birds were affected. It's really quite interesting, but these are all wild birds here in the green. And then here on Delmarva, we've had two flocks of broilers that were affected. And then these are pullets and layer hens that have been affected up here. and I think you can probably see it, but up here to the top, in the past 2 weeks, in the Pennsylvania area, Lancaster has experienced some outbreaks of avian influenza. And what happens is those birds are actually depopulated, and we depopulate because we're trying to eradicate that virus because we want to prevent the spread. And this just kind of shows you how many flocks as of last Thursday have been confirmed with avian influenza and how many states it is present in. So like I say, that's pretty, this is one of the things that is of great concern right at the moment. And one of the key things we're focused on in trying to eradicate the avian influenza virus. I'm going to just touch on this real quick, and this is going to be available for people to see later. But there is a trend to want to go to slow growing chickens. And if 1/3 of the industry went to slow growing chickens, the amount of resources it would take to do that would be, it would take the size of Maryland to replace that, to feed the chickens to go, if you were to go to slow growing. And it would actually reduce the population of Texas and California, the amount of chickens, the amount of less people that would be allowed to, that would be able to eat chicken a year because of it. But the big thing I want to share is, remember when I mentioned that my farm could feed 780,000 people a chicken for a night? It would mean my farm would feed 500,000 people chicken for a night. So, that's the impact of slow growing. Hey, if that's what you value, I'm sure there'll be people who are willing to supply that. But just understand the impact of that. That may be unintended. Population is definitely exploded in Kent and Sussex County, Delaware. And so what does that ultimately mean? It means, hey, there's a greater need for housing, and that drives up the price of farmland. And so actually I went and I looked to see, okay, what's the, where is Delaware and Maryland in terms of the cost per acre of farmland? We are in the top 5 states. We're 4th and 5th of the cost of per acre of farmland. So that creates a lot of pressure on farmers here, that, it's much more expensive to grow corn and soybeans. The value of your land is much more valuable if you were to say, hey, I'm going to grow houses, right? And so that's also a pressure that's on us. Chickens are incredibly nutritious, and they have a lot of value, especially especially when you look at the value of eggs from a nutritional standpoint in terms of brain development. Excellent resource of protein, important that it's handled properly. I won't talk much more about that. But Delmarva farm families, we raise food to feed the world, and it's always about trying to meet consumer demands and what they want. Environmental stewardship, it's about humanely raising these birds, and really the community that we're around and near. And so with that, I'll open up the questions. I talk fast, I get excited about this. There are some websites here that if you want to learn more, if you have questions for me, please reach out to me. I'm happy to answer those questions. So I don't know if we've had any questions along the way, and I know we don't, I'm like Faye, I'm right at almost 1 o'clock here, but.
Thank you, Georgie. So a couple of things. I'm going to put in the chat our little survey, and if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment and filling that out.
So Georgie, we had a very big basic question at the beginning. Are roasters older than 8 weeks?
They can be. The roaster was like Purdue in 1972 came out with the oven stuffer, right? The Purdue oven stuffer. And that's kind of, I thought of that as that roaster bird. But a roaster is typically going to be that bird at a pack out weight. You'll see in the grocery store, probably about 7.5, 8 pounds. And the goal with a roaster originally was to try to keep the price under $9.99. Now, the reality today, that is not the case. But that was kind of the fit for that. But the roaster, that oven stuffer type bird, isn't as popular today because a lot of people don't cook whole birds. They really want parts. And when you go to a Sam's Club and you see that huge roaster breast, remember, no hormones, no steroids. The size of that breast is because it probably came from a 9-week-old bird. And that's why you see the size of that breast.
Okay. Closely related to that is a question about chicken paws. What are they used for?
Where they are great for flavoring soups, and in the Asian market, they're a delicacy, and so that's why there's such a great demand for them. If we could grow chickens with 4 paws, they probably would, because they're just that, they're in that demand. We can't even meet the demand for chicken paws. And it's actually interesting. There's actually an underground market for chicken paws to try to get them to the places that they need to go. I'm not involved in that, but that's the demand for it.
Are they going overseas or are they staying?
Yeah,
in
the
country?
majority of them go overseas. You can't sell them to China, so they have to go through the back door to get there. So it's quite something, I think.
So, and we have another question. Do most chicken farmers also grow soybean and wheat, or do they need to buy from other farmers?
Well, in the integrated system, the poultry company actually is the one buying and purchasing the majority of that corn and soybeans, and they are the ones that are milling and making the chicken feed itself. But the poultry, there are lots of poultry farmers that are also grain and crop farmers. So it can be a nice complement to their existing farming operation, to be a way to diversify their operation. But today, there are quite a few farmers that poultry farming is their farming, and that's solely what they do, is they are poultry farmers, which if you were to go back 25 years ago, it tended to be a complement to it, not the sole means of it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And if anybody ever has questions for me, please reach out to me. Check out my Facebook and watch those videos if you're interested in seeing more and actually seeing the environment in the poultry house.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Georgie. You really, really shed some light on the poultry industry in our region. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate your humor and your visuals and us helping to really understand the system. And so it's like, as we said earlier, it's complex with lots of ripple effects. So thank you. So I do want to remind everyone, we are not meeting next week, but on May 16th, we're going to kind of focus on the consumer side, sort of knowing the consumer in our region and on increasing their access to food. And so we'll be kind of revisiting the notion of food insecurity, but what have our states done to really address this? And especially kind of the lessons learned from the disruption that COVID brought to us. And what are some things that are now in place to help us prevent those disruptions into the future? So in a couple weeks, Gina and Erin and Karen will be with us to kind of share their learnings and insights. So we really hope that you can join us then. I'll remind you to do a quick evaluation in the chat. Georgie, I'm sure will appreciate your feedback, as well as Jerry and I. And without further ado, I'll just say thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next time.